Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, November 16th, 2023. The House Ethics Committee says it found substantial evidence that Congressman George Santos, Republican from New York, broke the law by stealing money from his campaign, deceiving donors about how contributions would be used, engaging in fraudulent business dealings, and filing false campaign finance reports. Ethics Committee says that Congressman Santos warrants public condemnation, and the committee chair says he'll be introducing a resolution to expel the congressman. Congressman Santos calls the Ethics Committee report a disgusting political smear and says he's being stoned by those who have flaws themselves. We'll talk about the report with CQ Roll Call's Congressional accountability reporter Chris Marquette. There will be no federal government shutdown after the Senate passes a short-term funding extension late Wednesday night. That bill already had passed the House and will be signed into law by President Joe Biden before the Friday midnight deadline. The U.S. Capitol Police putting out a statement after Wednesday night's clash with pro-Palestinian protesters outside the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, saying, when demonstrations cross the line into illegal activity, it is our responsibility to maintain order and ensure people's safety. But one of the groups that organized the demonstration says it was the police who, quote, rushed in, threw us down the stairs, and pepper sprayed us. President Joe Biden speaks today to business leaders at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC Summit in San Francisco, saying of his 4-hour meeting Wednesday with Chinese President Xi Jinping, his aim is to responsibly manage the competition between the two countries. Republican Senator Jim Risch talks about his plan to make Russia pay for rebuilding Ukraine, hundreds of billions of dollars in damage caused by Russia's invasion and ongoing war. And a group of Republican senators again confront Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville about his holding up hundreds of military nominations and promotions until he gets a Pentagon abortion policy repealed. NBC News writes that embattled Congressman George Santos said Thursday he will not seek re-election in 2024 after the House Ethics Committee released a scathing report that concluded there is substantial evidence the New York Republican violated federal criminal laws, including using campaign funds for personal purposes and filing false campaign reports. Santos said in a statement on the social media site X, "I will continue on my mission to serve my constituents up until I am allowed. I will, however, not be seeking re-election for a second term in 2024, as my family deserves better than to be under the gun from the press all the time." That from NBC News. Congressman Ken Buck, Republican from Colorado, asked about this during an interview today on MSNBC.
You did not favor expulsion before. Do you now with this ethics report?
I do. I'm hoping that George does the right thing and resigns and leaves Congress. The Thanksgiving break is a great time to do that, clean out his office. But I did not vote in the past to expel George because I didn't believe there was due process. He had been charged criminally with felonies, very serious matters, but he had not been found guilty. And so the Ethics Committee really, I think, gave him the opportunity. He did not avail himself of that opportunity. The Ethics Committee found that he did not cooperate with the investigation, and I think he's been given the fair due process now.
Congressman Ken Buck, Republican from Colorado, on MSNBC. CQ Roll Call Congressional accountability reporter Chris Marquette is writing about the Congressman George Santos case and joins us now on the phone. Thank you for being with us. The first line of your article at rollcall.com talks about the substantial evidence in the House Ethics Committee report. What's in there?
The House Ethics Committee usually takes a very long time to produce a report on a member's conduct. In this one, they worked for several months, and they found substantial evidence that Representative George Santos, a New York Republican, committed additional violations of criminal law. That's additional violations from the 23 federal criminal charges that he's been indicted on. These additional criminal violations of criminal law that the Ethics Committee report found includes misreporting loans from the 2020 campaign and other reporting violations that include more instances of using campaign money for himself. So personal use of campaign funds is illegal. Other iterations of failing to file a financial disclosure report with the House for at least 2 years, 2021 and 2023, and additional errors and omissions in other financial disclosure reports. So what this report did was it kind of gave a large overview. Some of it was duplicative of what we already know through public reporting, the lies about attending Baruch College, the lies that his mother was in one of the Twin Towers on 9/11 and died as a result of health problems that were derived from that experience. So the committee also weighed in on those on components of those lies. They said that those were lies and that Santos lied about all that. And then, so right after the report came out, the Ethics Committee Chairman, Michael Guest, said that he intends to file a motion on Friday to expel Santos from the House. Santos, in response to the Ethics Committee's findings, called it a disgusting politicized smear in a posting on X, and also added that he would not seek re-election in 2024. So what we can see from this is the contents of the report are extremely detailed. There's further instances of Santos's alleged criminal conduct, and the Ethics Committee points specifically to personal loans during the 2020 and 2022 campaign cycles that totaled nearly $800,000 to his campaign and $27,000 to a leadership political action committee connected to him. And the committee also found that Santos was improperly repaid for loans that weren't made. The report also goes on to, at the top, I talked about additional aspects of him using campaign funds for personal use, which is a violation of federal law. The report detailed many instances of Santos using campaign funds for personal use that they said didn't have a nexus with a campaign use, and this includes many expenditures related to spa services and/or cosmetic procedures. That includes a $1,500 purchase at a company called Mirza Aesthetics, which was not reported to the FEC and was described as Botox. Another $1,400 charge at Virtual Skin Spa that the campaign account labeled as a Botox expenditure. And then an additional PayPal payment of over $1,000 associated with a spa in Rhinebeck, New York, was not reported. Further instances of him using campaign funds for personal use include him making a $4,000 purchase at Hermes and making smaller purchases at OnlyFans, Sephora, and for meals and parking. So, in total, the Ethics Committee found a lot of issues. They detailed more instances of him using campaign funds for personal use, which are also included in the charges of the indictment, but these are additional instances of that. And the committee said that Santos's conduct warrants public condemnation, is beneath the dignity of the office, and has brought severe discredit upon the House. So although the report, and a lot of times Ethics Committee reports on members will make a recommendation for a sanction, such as expulsion, which is the harshest they can recommend, or lesser penalties such as censure, reprimand, reproval, admonishment. They don't make a specific recommendation in this report, because they said that would have elongated the time. It would have made the report come out even later than it did already, and it's already been in the works for several months now. But what it's going to function to do is it's going to give a lot of, I think, members who are hesitant to vote to expel him without, some sort of comprehensive report or some sort of due process, a little bit of cover to go ahead and change their vote from not supporting expulsion to supporting expulsion. And there's been 2 attempts to expel him thus far this Congress, one in May, which was tabled by a procedural move, and then Speaker Kevin McCarthy said Santos was entitled to due process. And the second push, which occurred the start of this month in November, was not close to reaching the two-thirds threshold, threshold that you need to expel a member. But this third instance could be the report that really kind of pushes that third attempt to expel him over the finish line. And Michael Guest, the chairman of the Ethics Committee, said after the members get back from Thanksgiving, he's going to work with leadership to try to set up a vote to expel Santos.
We're talking with Chris Marquette, CQ Roll Call Congressional Accountability Reporter. What has been the political fallout so far of this case? Congressman Santos is a freshman, but is known nationwide and not for very good things.
Yeah, I mean, he's very resilient in the sense of, he even a couple of two people in his orbit, his campaign treasurer and another campaign employee have already pleaded guilty to charges in connection with campaign finance violations that are tied to Santos's congressional campaign. And even after that, he's been resilient. He said he's not going to step down. He did say today after the ethics report was released that he wouldn't run for re-election, but he is not. He has been very, very steadfast in committing to stay in office, not resign, not step down, and he said he's going to fight the charges at trial. Outside of that, I mean, the people who brought the expulsion resolution to the floor in earlier this month were a lot of his GOP colleagues from neighboring districts in New York. And they, talking with them, they have no relationship with him. I think they're embarrassed to be associated with him as New York Republicans. And I think the feeling among a lot of Republicans is they just really don't want to, have anything to do with him because he's so politically toxic.
Chris Marquette is a congressional accountability reporter with CQ Roll Call. Congressman Nick LaLota, Republican from New York, putting out a statement. The Bipartisan Ethics Committee confirmed what most New Yorkers knew months ago. George Santos is a total fraud who stole an election to get to Congress. The House must use our constitutional expulsion powers. This will let the 3rd District participate in a valid election. And a spokesperson for House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, with this statement, Speaker Johnson thanks Ethics Committee Chair Guest for the thorough investigation, which was released today. The Speaker has reviewed the report and its very troubling findings. As members from both parties, members of the Ethics Committee and Representative Santos return to Congress after the Thanksgiving break, Speaker Johnson encourages all involved to consider the best interests of the institution as this matter is addressed further. This is Washington Today. Senate has joined the House for a week off for the Thanksgiving holiday after also joining the House and passing late Wednesday night a temporary government funding extension to avoid a shutdown when current funding authorization expires this Friday. The extension funds parts of the government through January 19th and the rest through February 2nd. So next time around, there are going to be 2 deadlines for potential partial government shutdowns. Before the final passage vote in the Senate Wednesday night, there was one amendment offered by Republican Rand Paul to cut spending 15% across the board, except for the Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs, and also claw back $30 billion from the IRS. You'll hear from Senator Paul and then opposition to the amendment from Democratic Senator Patty Murray.
My amendment will make across-the-board reductions except for defense and veterans benefits. Additionally, the amendment would cut $30 billion from the Biden administration's attempt to sick the IRS on American taxpayers, to squeeze even more money out of those who have earned their hard-earned dollars. All told, my amendment would save taxpayers $50 billion, which is only about 1% of all budgetary spending. It's a small and modest reduction in spending, but it's a step in the right direction. This is not the first time I've offered an amendment to save the taxpayers money. Throughout my time in the Senate, I have time and time again offered balanced budgets and plans that would shave pennies, mere pennies, from every budgetary every budgetary program to restore our fiscal health. And every time these proposals are rejected by the Senate. The result of failing to act then is that today we now vote in the shadow of a mountain of debt. It's time that we rise up and tell your members of Congress that enough is enough. It is time to take a stand while the restoration of American prosperity is still within our grasp. By the time this continuing resolution expires, the people who ask for your vote next year will have added another $1 trillion to the debt. It's time to take a stand. I urge a yes vote on my amendment and call up amendment number 1366 and ask that it be reported by number.
The clerk will report by number.
The senator from Kentucky, Mr. Paul, proposes an amendment number 1366.
President.
The senator from Washington.
Madam President, there is a lot we need to get done. As soon as we prevent a shutdown by passing this continuing resolution, we need to come together in a bipartisan way to keep working on things like the comprehensive supplemental funding package for Ukraine and Israel, for humanitarian assistance and more. And of course, we've got to pass our full-year spending bills that live up to the agreement this Congress passed in a bipartisan way and meets the needs of our communities. These are real issues that we need to take seriously and move on quickly. And then there is this amendment, which, let's all be honest, is just not serious, but would be absolutely devastating. This amendment would slash huge swaths of discretionary spending by a whopping and totally arbitrary 15%, not to mention the cut to the IRS of $30 billion. We are talking across-the-board cuts with no rhyme or reason that would devastate our families, our economy, our competitive edge, and our national security. That is not a solution. It's not serious. It is a gift to our adversaries who want us to fall behind. And it's a slap in the face to families across the country who are counting on the critical investments Congress makes in their communities. I urge all of my colleagues to join me in voting against it.
Senator Patty Murray, Democrat from Washington State and chair of the Appropriations Committee. And you also heard from Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor right before midnight Eastern Time on Wednesday night into Thursday. The Senate ended up voting down Senator Paul's amendment by a vote of 32 to 65, and then went on to pass the original continuing resolution, or CR, the temporary government funding extension that had passed the House earlier this week, and that vote was 87 to 11. One Democrat voted no, Michael Bennet of Colorado, and the Republicans voting no, Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, Mike Braun of Indiana, Mike Crapo of Idaho, Mike Lee of Utah, Rand Paul of Kentucky, Jim Risch of Idaho, Eric Schmidt of Missouri, Rick Scott of Florida, Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, and J.D. Vance of Ohio. After passage, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer spoke on the Senate floor.
Madam President, I have good news for the American people. This Friday night, there will be no government shutdown. Thank you. Because of bipartisan cooperation, we are keeping the government open without any poison pills or harmful cuts to vital programs. A great outcome for the American people. Can we have order, please? I am pleased that Speaker Johnson realized he needed Democratic votes to avoid a shutdown. If the Speaker is willing to work with Democrats and resist the siren song of the hard right in the House, then we can avoid shutdowns in the future and finish the work of funding the government. Today's CR is a good first step and a very good omen for the future. I hope we see more bipartisanship down the line. Every time I've gotten on the phone with the Speaker, I've stressed we need bipartisanship if we want to finish the appropriations process. I hope the new Speaker continues to choose the bipartisan approach as he commendably has in his first foray. Now, keeping the government open is a good outcome, but we have a lot more to do after Thanksgiving. We must finish passing President Biden's emergency supplemental with aid to Israel, Ukraine, humanitarian assistance for innocent civilians in Gaza, and funds for the Indo-Pacific. We will keep working with Leader McConnell on a way forward. I know that both sides genuinely care about providing aid to Israel and Ukraine and helping innocent civilians in Gaza, so I hope we can come to an agreement, even if neither side gets everything they insist on. We will also complete our work on the National Defense Authorization Act before the end of the year. For now, I thank my colleagues for voting to keep the government open. I thank Leader McConnell, Chair Murray, Vice Chair Collins, and all of the appropriators. Again, no government shutdown, no cuts to vital programs, no poison pills. This is a great outcome for the American people.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor late Wednesday night. On Wall Street, the Dow down 45, NASDAQ up 9, S&P up 5. Sounds of the melee outside the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, D.C. Wednesday night between protesters calling for a ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas and U.S. Capitol Police. The police putting out a statement today that reads, last night approximately 200 people gathered in front of the DNC headquarters to protest the conflict in the Middle East. We have handled hundreds of peaceful protests, but last night's group was not peaceful. The crowd failed to obey our lawful orders to move back from the DNC, where members of Congress were in the building. When the group moved dumpsters in front of the exits, pepper sprayed our officers, and attempted to pick up the bike rack, our teams quickly introduced consequences, pulling people off the building, pushing them back, and clearing them from the area so we could safely evacuate the members and staff. 6 officers were treated for injuries, from minor cuts to being pepper sprayed to being punched. 24-year-old Ruben Arthur Camacho of Woodbridge, New York, was arrested for assault on a police officer after an officer witnessed Camacho slam another officer into a garage door and then punch the female officer in the face. Last night, our team was quick, decisive, courageous, and in control. When demonstrations cross the line into illegal activity, it is our responsibility to maintain order and ensure people's safety. The complete statement from the U.S. Capitol Police. Congressman Brad Sherman, Democrat from California, told CNN last night what he saw happen.
We heard the demonstrators outside. They disrupted us a bit. And then we were told we were in lockdown and would not be allowed to leave. And then the police came in, the Capitol Police, who did an outstanding job, and evacuated us through the basement.
And you said that there were members of leadership there. Which members were there, and did they leave before the protesters turned violent?
Akeem Jeffries, Catherine Clark, and Pete Aguilar, our 3 top leaders, were all there. Of course, Susan Del Buene, the head of the DCCC, also one of our top leaders, was there at the when the evacuation took place.
We know that there were some arrests, and the area is now open again. And Senator Schumer says there's going to be a vote tonight on the stopgap spending bill. How were you able to get out, and were you concerned at all for your safety as this was all going on?
I've been doing this for 27 years. I don't get that concerned. Some other of my colleagues were much more concerned. We were evacuated in police vehicles to the Capitol and then went home from there. The one point I want to make is yesterday there were over 200,000 pro-Israel demonstrators with a permit, entirely peaceful. And here you have a demonstration less than 1,000th as large that's also getting publicity. And it's getting publicity because their willingness to attack police, as they did with pepper spray, is a force multiplier. A few demonstrators willing to attack police getting a fair amount of publicity, whereas the amount of publicity for 200,000 peaceful demonstrators proportionately less.
Congressman Brad Sherman, Democrat from California, interviewed on CNN last night. The group titled If Not Now, which was one of the organizers of the protest last night, posted today on X responding to Congressman Sherman. This is dangerous and reckless disinformation, Congressman. We were peacefully linking arms, singing, and calling for a ceasefire, as you can see with your own eyes in this video. Then Capitol Police rushed in, threw us down the stairs, and pepper sprayed us. Retract this now. They attached on that post a video. It's 15 seconds of the group singing, and then it cuts to the skirmish.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Someone just got thrown. People getting thrown down the stairs. People getting thrown down the stairs.
That video posted by the group If Not Now. A joint statement from the House Democratic leadership reads, "We are thankful for the service and professionalism of the U.S. Capitol Police officers who worked to ensure that members, staff, and visitors were able to safely exit. We strongly support the First Amendment right to freedom of expression and encourage anyone exercising that right to do so peacefully." And the White House says that today the President and First Lady called into a DNC and campaign staff meeting. They expressed appreciation to law enforcement who kept everyone inside the DNC safe last night, including staff and members of Congress. The President and First Lady also thanked the staffers for all they do, wished them happy Thanksgiving, and told them to take care of each other. And finally, this post from Congressman Tom Emmer, Republican from Minnesota, the majority whip. There were 2 protests in D.C. this week. One was pro-Israel and peaceful. The other was pro-Hamas and injured 6 Capitol Police officers. The contrast couldn't be more clear. This is Washington Today. Associated Press reporting from the Gaza Strip that internet and telephone services collapsed across Gaza on Thursday for lack of fuel, the main Palestinian provider said, bringing a potentially long-term communications blackout, even as Israel signaled its offensive could next target the south of the territory, where most of the population has taken refuge. Meanwhile, Israeli troops for a second day searched Shifa Hospital in the north for traces of Hamas. They displayed guns they say were found hidden in one building, but have yet to release any evidence of the central Hamas command center that Israel has said is concealed beneath the complex. Hamas and staff at the hospital, Gaza's largest, deny the allegations. That was from Associated Press. In Washington, the State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller asked by a reporter about the war and the hospitals in Gaza.
Of course, there's the operations in Al-Shifa Hospital. There are also operations surrounding another hospital, which I think the name was Ali Arab. There's been strikes on the Jordanian military hospital in Gaza. All hospitals, is it still your understanding that there would be Hamas commands in all those hospitals? And more generally, again, I repeat, is it a legitimate thing to hit or strike or attack or what have you in hospital?
Let me say a few things about that. First, just as a matter, we never said that there were command posts in all of the hospitals. We said that it is our assessment that there are command posts in hospitals. We did make a specific assessment as it related to Al-Shifa, but we did not say that there are command posts in every hospital in Gaza. But there are command posts in hospitals there, and there are tunnels underneath hospitals there. Let me speak first of all to the Jordanian medical personnel that were injured outside a field hospital in Gaza. We are deeply concerned that they were injured. The Jordanian government has done incredible work establishing this field hospital and other medical facilities in Gaza. We think they're essential and it must be protected. That work must be allowed to continue. And we reiterate the obligations under international humanitarian law for all parties to take feasible precautions to reduce the risk of harm to civilians, and we urge all possible steps to mitigate civilian harm. As it relates to hospitals, as we said before, we don't want to see hospitals struck from the air. We understand that Hamas does continue to use hospitals as places where they embed their fighters. It's places where they have tunnels running underneath. And so it can be appropriate for Israel to conduct limited military operations with respect to hospitals, but we want to see them do it in a way that minimizes civilian casualties. We do not want to see hospitals in the middle of firefights. We do not want to see patients put at risk. It's why we've called for the evacuation of hospitals when appropriate and said we would support international humanitarian organizations evacuating patients so they could be put out of harm's way. This is, I think as I said before, this is such a difficult issue because two things can be true at one time. One, we want to see hospitals protected. Two, Hamas is operating outside of hospitals, and Israel has a right to try to attack Hamas and hold them accountable and keep them from launching new attacks. So how do you square those two things? The way we try to square it is to say, number one, no airstrikes on hospitals, and number two, if Israel is going to conduct limited military operations in hospitals, as they're doing with respect to Al-Shifa now, that they try to do it in a way that minimizes civilian harm, and so they only are putting in jeopardy Hamas fighters and not civilians.
U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference today. Washington Post says that Hamas has agreed in principle, and Israel is now considering a proposal for the release of at least 50 women and children among about 240 foreign and Israeli hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza, according to an Arab diplomat familiar with the negotiations. In exchange for the hostages, Israel would agree to a 3 to 5 day pause in place in the fighting, increased humanitarian aid into Gaza, and the release of an unspecified number of women and children held in Israeli prisons. And today from the Times of Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces says it has recovered the body of Yehudit Weiss, 65 years old, who was abducted by Hamas on October 7th from a building near Shifa Hospital in the Gaza Strip. Washington Today continues in a moment.
We want to take a minute to ask for your help. Your financial support will ensure that C-SPAN can continue to produce podcasts that inform you about national politics, introduce you to the latest nonfiction books, and provide valuable historical context to today's news. Make a donation today and be a part of C-SPAN's future. Visit c-span.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. From Associated Press in San Francisco, fresh off his meeting with the leader of China, President Joe Biden on Thursday is addressing CEOs who are grappling with the risks to their businesses from world crises. He'll also spend some time trying to persuade the other Indo-Pacific leaders that the U.S. is committed to nurturing economic ties throughout the region. President Biden is courting world leaders at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, summit, and through his administration's Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, a group that includes most of the 21 APEC member economies and a few others like India that aren't members of the larger forum. APEC members have invested $1.7 trillion in the U.S. economy, supporting some 2.3 million American jobs. U.S. companies, in turn, have invested about $1.4 trillion in APEC economies. That from Associated Press. During the speech to the CEOs, President Biden talked about his meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping yesterday.
I'm also intent on responsibly managing the competition between the United States and the People's Republic of China. That's what we talked a little bit about yesterday, President Xi and I. That's what the world expects of us. And I promise you that's what we're doing. I met with Xi yesterday, leader to leader, to make sure there's no miscommunication between us. As always, I've met with him more than any other world leader because when I was vice president, it was concluded that I should get to know him. It wasn't inappropriate for the President of the United States to be meeting with the Vice President. We've had, prior to this, 68 hours of private meetings, just he and I, each with a simultaneous interpreter. Our discussions have always been candid and constructive. I again emphasize to President Xi that the United States does not seek conflict. And yesterday we announced resumption of military-to-military communication channels to reduce the risk of accidental miscalculation. And it exists. This is not, as my generation would say back in the day, this is not all kumbaya, but it's straightforward. It's straightforward. We have real differences with Beijing when it comes to maintaining fair and level economic playing field and protecting your intellectual property. We're going to continue to address them with smart policies and strong diplomacy. We've also taken targeted action to protect our vital national security interest. Let me be clear. We are de-risking and diversifying our economic relationship with the PRC, not decoupling. Not decoupling. We'll be firm, standing up for our values and our interests. And I was very straightforward, as he was with me yesterday. At the same time, on critical global issues such as climate, AI, counter-narcotics, where it makes sense to work together, we've committed to work together. We're going to continue our commitment to diplomacy, to avoid surprises, and prevent misunderstandings. A stable relationship between the world's two largest economies is not merely good for the two economies, but for the world. A stable relationship. It's good for everyone.
President Biden today speaking to business leaders at the APEC summit in San Francisco. Also on the president's schedule today, meeting with the leaders of Japan and South Korea, and then the family photo, working lunch, and the formal dinner with all the APEC leaders. The annual APEC summit was begun by former President Bill Clinton in 1993. Last time the U.S. hosted was 2011. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with U.S. business leaders Wednesday night. He told them China is pursuing high-quality development and the United States is revitalizing its economy. There is plenty of room for our cooperation, and we are fully able to help each other succeed and achieve win-win outcomes. Chinese president also suggested that China would be sending more giant pandas to the U.S. This after last week, the 3 giant pandas from the Smithsonian National Zoo in Washington were returned to China.
Recently, the 3 pandas at the Smithsonian's National Zoo in Washington have returned to China. I was told that many American people, especially children, were really reluctant to say goodbye to the pandas and went to the zoo to see them off. I also learned that the San Diego Zoo and the Californians very much look forward to welcoming pandas back. Pandas have long been envoys of friendship between the Chinese and American peoples. We are ready to continue our cooperation with the United States on panda conservation and do our best to meet the wishes of the Californians so as to deepen friendly ties between our peoples.
Chinese President Xi Jinping addressing U.S. business leaders Wednesday night at the APEC summit in San Francisco. The first giant pandas were sent to the U.S. back in 1972 as relations were normalized between the U.S. and the People's Republic of China. Currently, there are only 4 in the U.S. at the Atlanta Zoo. Fresno Bee in California reports that a congressional committee investigating Chinese communist influence blames gaps in the U.S. regulatory framework for allowing a wanted fugitive to set up a clandestine biological laboratory in Reedley last year. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control was also faulted by the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party for its baffling and unacceptable response to Reedley city officials who sought the agency's help identifying thousands of vials of suspected contagions inside the warehouse. The committee's conclusions were included in a 41-page report released Wednesday in Washington, D.C. That was from the Fresno Bee. C-SPAN covered the news conference and the release of the report in Washington, and joining them, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California.
The owner of the lab shouldn't even been in America. He was here illegally. He had a judgment, as you watched in this report, from stealing IP from Canada and America for more than $330 million, living under a false name, and illegally providing this lab. But something that the ranking member brought up, unbeknownst to many of us, and we are lawmakers, how easy it is to get such serious pathogens to be able to purchase them online. And what we have found through this investigation, the millions of dollars running from China to this facility. The purchasing of test kits that we found do not work, but making made in America and selling them in America to Americans, giving them false hope, false understanding when it comes to health and others. And then the greatest concern that I have when you look at on the samples of the pathogens from HIV, meningitis, Ebola sitting there, the failure when it comes to the CDC. Congress should not have had to get involved here. The local representatives did exactly what was right. They reached out to the federal authorities that should deal with this. The CDC and others hung up on them, ignored them, until the Congressman Jim Costa called them. But when the CDC showed up, they should have done what was right then, and they did not. They did not test the pathogens. They did not even find all of them. They left a freezer with Ebola in it, and we know how lethal that is and what could happen, especially in the Central Valley. Watching what is going on in this lab, the testing and the mice dealing with COVID and others, we still don't have the clear understanding. And it wasn't until the Select Committee here got involved Did the owner get arrested? Did we find out that the CDC finally would get involved? But in all these findings, what I think really comes forth is we need to produce legislation to change this. We need safeguards on these pathogens. It should not be so freely be able to purchase on the internet. How deadly that could be to the rest of this country. How many more labs are like this throughout America? Is China involved in other labs inside America? Is China involved with pathogens inside America as well?
Congressman Kevin McCarthy, former House Speaker, Republican from California, at a news conference Wednesday in Washington with members of the House Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the U.S. and the Chinese Communist Party. Attending that news conference, both Democratic and Republican members, on the release of the committee's report on the illegal biolab found in Greeley, California. An update on the war between Russia and Ukraine from BBC News. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, has said that Ukrainian forces have gained a foothold on the left or eastern bank of the Dnipro River. Russia has admitted that some Ukrainian forces have set up positions in a village, but claims they will soon be wiped out. If the area is held, it would mean a significant advance for Ukraine. Russia retreated from the right bank of the river a year ago. In Washington, Senator Jim Risch, Republican from Idaho and ranking member on the Foreign Relations Committee, talked about his proposal to require Russia pay for reconstructing Ukraine for all the damage caused by its invasion. Senator Risch was at the Hudson Institute today.
In Kyiv and Irpin last year, I saw firsthand some of the destruction that Russia has rained down on Ukrainian infrastructure, homes, schools, business, and manufacturing. The scale of the damage, as you all know, is immense. This devastation has decimated Ukraine's economy, with experts placing current estimates to rebuild at over $400 billion. That number will only increase more and the longer that this war drags on. The harsh reality presents the United States and its allies with a problem. How do we hold Russia, a major economy with significant resources and veto powers at major international institutions, accountable for its invasion of Ukraine, the destruction it has created, and the lives that it has cost? And how can we best keep Ukraine, rebuild its country, save its economy, and become integrated more into the West? This is really a simple process, a simple matter. Russia broke it; they ought to pay for it. That's really, really simple. We understand it. The world understands that.
Senator Jim Risch, Republican from Idaho, ranking member on the Foreign Relations Committee, on his bill to require Russia to pay. Senator Risch spoke at the Hudson Institute. A group of 4 U.S. Senate Republicans again challenged Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville's hold on military nominees and promotions on the Senate floor from just after midnight until nearly 4 a.m. Eastern Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Senator Tuberville has been protesting for almost a year the Pentagon's policy of assisting women to cross state lines if necessary to get an abortion. Over 300 military nominations and promotions have been held up. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, one of those 4 senators trying to get the nominees through.
This will be the last holiday this happens. If it takes me to vote to break loose these folks, I will. I'm not going to talk about me being pro-life. Just look at what I've done. To my pro-life friends, you're not advancing this cause. You're hurting this cause if the average American believes that the reason these people are getting blocked from promotion is because of policy choice they didn't make. It is not fair to have people in uniform who have to follow their civilian leadership when the fundamental precepts of American democracy is civilian control of the military. They have no choice. Don't punish them because in our system, the civilians make the decisions. Let's punish the civilians who make these choices. There are plenty of people we can hold and should hold. There are plenty of things we can do to fight to right this wrong. We can go to court. We can insist on change through the NDAA process. But this is not righting the wrong.
Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, on the Senate floor in the very early morning hours Thursday, joined by other Senate Republicans, Dan Sullivan of Alaska, Todd Young from Indiana, and Joni Ernst from Iowa, all pushing to have these nominees unblocked. Senator Tuberville was in the chamber, but it was Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, who spoke to object to the unanimous consent request to approve military nominations and promotions and to defend Senator Tuberville's hold on them. Senator Lee said that Senator Tuberville had the right as a senator to use this power to hold nominations. He also pointed out that federal law prohibits using public money to pay for abortions, and he said that's exactly what the new Pentagon policy amounts to.
A hold is not an inexorable block. He's not damning these people to Senate confirmation. Hell, doesn't have that power. That's above his pay grade, all of ours. What he's doing is he's saying, there's the fast path and there's the slow path. We always use the fast path, but that requires the acquiescence, the agreement, the unanimous consent of all 100 of us. If you don't do that, I, Senator Tuberville, will make you take the slow path. Secretary Austin is a decorated war hero. Secretary Austin has been around for a long time. He knows the Senate, he knows the Pentagon well, he knew the risks. He chose to play chicken. He chose to look a United States Senator in the eye and say, thank you, I'll take that under advisement. And in a cowardly moment, he decided to arrogate to himself power that does not belong to him, because the Constitution of the United States doesn't give it to him, because you can't legislate from the E-ring of the Pentagon. No matter how strongly he feels, no matter how compelling his urge to facilitate the performance of abortion using federal funds, contrary to public opinion, contrary to federal law, he does not have that power. And shame on him. It is to his everlasting shame that he would arrogate to himself that power, and then have the audacity to blame Senator Tuberville for the slowdown that he himself knowingly, willfully, shamefully created.
Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, on the Senate floor late last night into the early morning hours. This week, the Senate Rules Committee reported a bill that would allow hundreds of military nominations and promotions being held up by Senator Tuberville to get a single up and down vote en bloc. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has not yet scheduled that temporary rules change for a vote in the Senate. In presidential campaign news, New Hampshire has announced it's going to hold its primary on January 23rd, 2024. It's not a problem for the Republican Party. That party is still seeking to keep New Hampshire's traditional first-in-the-nation status. But for the Democratic Party, the DNC, Democratic National Committee, has voted to put South Carolina's primary first on February 3rd and move New Hampshire to February 6th, along with Nevada. New Hampshire has held its first-in-the-nation primary status for more than a century, and in 1975 it passed a law requiring its primary take place at least 7 days before any other state. New Hampshire Secretary of State David Scanlon made the announcement Wednesday night in Concord.
We did not take the first-in-the-nation primary from anyone, and we will vigorously defend it. The first-in-the-nation status is now being challenged by the Democratic National Committee due to alleged concerns over the lack of racial diversity in the state. Their pundits have claimed that New Hampshire is too white and, by extension, too privileged. A couple of months ago, I heard a former chair of the DNC talk on a talk show asking the voters of New Hampshire if they knew what it was like to live on a dirt road. And the answer to that, of course, is yes, we do. And I would add that you cannot truly appreciate a dirt road until you have experienced one during a New Hampshire mud season. Using racial diversity as a cudgel in an attempt to rearrange the presidential nominating calendar is an ugly precedent. At what point does a state become too old, or too wealthy, or too educated, or too religious to hold an early primary. The truth is, there is no individual state that truly reflects the makeup of America, and no state is more American than any other state. With that said, diversity is not the real issue at play in this debate. At stake is who gets to determine the nominee of the party. The elites on a national party committee by controlling the nominating calendar, or the voters.
New Hampshire Secretary of State David Scanlon at a news conference in Concord, New Hampshire. He was joined by the state chairs of both the Democratic and Republican parties. David Scanlon said that 21 Democrats and 24 Republicans have filed to run for president on the New Hampshire primary. Joe Biden is not one of them. NBC News article explains in a letter to New Hampshire Democratic Party Chair Ray Buckley, Biden campaign manager Julie Chavez Rodriguez said that Biden was, quote, obligated as a Democratic candidate for president to comply with the delegate selection rules for the 2024 Democratic National Convention promulgated by the Democratic National Committee. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. It's free, and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.